Ah, the joys of Twitch ads. C'est la vie. Um, cool.
I don't know how to argue with you at that point. Because it's just repackaged, old fashioned homophobia from the 50s, 60s, and further behind. It's the idea that anyone who doesn't conform to a perfectly heteronormative lifestyle for some reason has to be a pedophile. You know, I'm kind of done like respecting my political opponents at this point. I used to be a lot more respectful in my videos where I try to, reason with their worldview and sort of see where they were coming from. But like, I'm kind of over that at this point. Because it doesn't really work, and it's not as if anyone from that camp is giving the same kind of benefit of the doubt to me. And the reason why is pretty obvious. They don't actually care about children or safety or anything that they're saying that they care about. They just care about getting rid of trans people. The point of this entire ideology is to get rid of trans people. That's the start and the beginning of their entire methodology. And it's the only thing that explains the variety of different laws that people levy against trans people. And if you want evidence specifically to see that the only reason for why people are transphobic is because they don't like trans people, well, there's plenty of evidence to find. Take, for example, the current outrage against bad beer company Bud Light. So the story here is that influencer Dylan Mulvaney got sponsored by Bud Light to do a sort of sponsored segment in their content. And you know what those are. It's when influencers try to sell you a product and then they get some money from a company in order to do it. Now, speaking of which, in this one, people lost their minds.
I'd like to bring up one of the biggest pedophiles in America today. His name is Dylan Mulvaney.
She exists so that you think that you can choose, but go, it tickles, oh my God.
And they lost it because she's trans. That's the only reason. That's the whole source of this outrage. It's not as if Dylan is marketing this to kids. It's not as if Dylan is somehow cancelled in some actual problematic way. Dylan is actually maybe one of the most unproblematic content creators out there right now. I can see why people like her, although she's mostly popular on TikTok among Zoomers, I think. Maybe. I don't understand TikTok. A lot of conservative influencers have been outright demanding a formal apology by the company behind Bud Light.
To be fair, I don't understand TikTok either. I have an account on there, but it's...
But why? What exactly are they supposed to be apologizing for? When Bud Light released a statement on Twitter, a lot of people were saying, this is not a real formal apology, do better. But what did they do wrong in the first place?
This is not an apology. Apologize. They must apologize. This is not enough.
It's gone to the point where even associating loosely with trans people has become extraordinarily controversial. And this issue isn't about bathrooms, it's not about sports, it's not about anything like that.
I believe there is actually one of the schedules to the Constitution. I think Title 9. One of them, one of the title type things, that actually has implements a specific restriction on the use of hate speech under the First Amendment, and criminalizes it. But honestly, I actually believe that all of this sort of stuff that Mia is talking about here is stochastic terrorism and should be treated as terrorism. Because the idea is to make people terrified to be who they are, to express that part of themselves. And I think that's deeply problematic. And you don't get to call yourself a society that values freedom when you carry on like that.
But beer and the fact that she's trans. The reason that people give as to why the company should apologize is because it gives legitimacy to the idea of transgenderism, which on its own apparently is dangerous enough as a concept. The idea of trans people is enough to force a company to apologize. They claim that any exposure of transness into the mainstream will expose children to transgenderism, and that is going to either sexualize children, which is bad enough in itself, or it's going to create children who think that they're trans. Which leads us to the next question then. Can children be trans?
So that's an interesting one. And I think the answer is yes. Why? Because, quite frankly, there were several moments where if I had a term to apply to some experiences I had as a kid, I would have gone, oh, I'm trans. Cool. And I wouldn't have a deep mannish voice. I wouldn't have an Adam's apple at this point, etc., etc., etc. Well, I mean, assuming I could get the appropriate treatment. But that aside, and yes, that is a big aside. Yeah, you get my point. Trans representation is super important because without it, people can't see. Like, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And sometimes you have to see other people displaying something that is inherently important and beautiful about yourself before you can actually start embracing it for yourself. Even if it's only hints along the way, eventually you can get to it helps you put the puzzle together. And that's really what these conservatives don't want, is people to have those clues. They want everyone to conform. They want everyone to be being good little breeders, having kids for capitalism, and putting population pressure to keep wages low and all of these sorts of things. And that's all in the service of the billionaire class. And guess who some of the richest billionaires in the US are? They're fucking religious pastors who run mega churches. It's not good. And that's for people in general. For women specifically, barefoot and pregnant, subservient to their man. Yeah, I mean, I first realised I was trans in my early 20s. And I'm glad you found out early. But, like, one of the things that was a recurring lucid dream and almost an obsession was this idea of wishing for like early tens, tweens sort of era. Wishing that I had some sort of suit, the magic suit that I could put on and become anyone I wanted to be. And that person was always a girl. Always wanted to be a girl in that scenario. So how can you say that's not trans ideation? I didn't see that on television. I didn't see that on... Like, there was no drag on television in the 1970s. Not in country South Australia. So, Anyway, I think Mia is probably going to be pretty adamant about the fact that, yes, you can be trans as a kid, but Yeah. Yeah. I wish I had that option. I was too Catholic, brought up too conservatively in a overly conservative area in an overly conservative church, i.e. the Catholic Church. Just didn't have any safe people to say that to.
Well, yeah. Duh. Children seem to be at the center of this debate, but they're actually not. When I first made the script for this video, there was a part of me that's just like, oh cool, I'm going to spend a significant amount of time talking about like the concept of childhood and whether or not children can be trans. But like, it doesn't matter, because the entire discussion has nothing to do with actual trans children. At all. Nada. But that's not what you'd think by watching conservative pundits talk about trans people in the media.
Just protecting children in this state across a wide variety of things. And one of the things that they're trying to do is they talk about these very young kids getting gender-affirming care.
But you'd think if they spend so much time talking about it, that they would at least know the basic facts of what they are actually talking about. Take, for example, conservative commentator Matt Walsh. He's made documentaries, he's talked about trans people.
I appreciate that. Look, I have claimed my identity in a way that I'm very comfortable with. Yeah, no worries. Good luck with your work. Thank you for hanging out and vibing with me for a while. Really appreciate the company. Have a great afternoon, evening at work, whatever it is for you, and hopefully we'll catch another day. All right.
Incessantly, he's gone to podcasts to talk about trans people and talked about the dangers of puberty blockers and the epidemic of transness among our youth. He takes a typical conservative form of debating, which is to argue against college students who don't really know how to debate people like him. But when he talks to anyone who actually wants to fact check him on anything, he just falls apart. On an episode of Joe Rogan's podcast, Matt Walsh talks about the amount of people who use puberty blockers.
Millions of kids have been on hormone blockers, really?
I'm sure someone's going to fact check me on that, but my guess is that we're into the millions now at this point. Yeah,
that's a very small number, if that's right.
It says over the last 5 years, there were at least 4,780 adolescents who started puberty blockers and had a prior gender dysphoria diagnosis.
So despite having really strong feelings on the topic, he doesn't actually know the basic facts of the topic itself. And to be clear, the facts are settled. There are multiple medical guidelines that discuss the best way to treat children who suffer.
Walsh is a conservative tradcath who is as misogynistic as the day is long, and so much of his trans bullshit is wrapped up in basically his own pedophilia, his own want to have exclusive access to 15, 16-year-old girls for breeding purposes. And that's not cool. Fuck Matt Walsh.
Suffer from gender dysphoria. And there are multiple studies that have shown that if you allow trans children to be their authentic selves, they will be happier people. That's just an objective fact at this point. Study after study shows that trans people exist and that some of those trans people are children. This isn't really controversial if we're actually talking about facts. No one is transing your kid, it's just that any kid can be trans. And in this modern world, it's easier for children to find language to describe themselves, or for medical professionals to lend children the tools that they need to describe themselves. And children having these tools objectively leads to less negative psychological outcomes. But why are we even debating this? Because this doesn't matter to the people who actually have the power to decide over the lives of trans children. Lawmakers who are convinced that the transes are coming to steal your children don't care about the actual facts of the matter. They're still implementing medicine bans, they're still implementing bans on gender-affirming care for young people, and in some cases even adults. So arguing the facts here is a mistake, because they don't care about the facts of the matter. They care about control. Like I've mentioned, these laws don't actually do anything when it comes to helping the mental health of children. Like, at all. The reason, as always, is ideological. And this time it's the ideology that traditional values, no matter what, are uniquely the best. But it's also a redefinition of what traditional values even mean in the first place. Like, I grew up next to a literal field of hay in a very conservative part of my country. I didn't get any sexual health education until my mid-teens. I regularly went to church with my school for some reason, and that village also turns out votes for conservative parties every single election as well. But back then, people had no problem with an entire class doing their own drag show. Today, that would be seen as almost absurd. To them at the time, this was not seen as children being indoctrinated into some sort of lifestyle. This was just kids being kids. And unless that one drag show that I did as a kid somehow transed me or making me think that I was trans for a while now, I don't really see how I could have been tricked into being trans by the trans agenda. My parents were pretty traditional. I didn't really grow up knowing any of that gay stuff, and I had to figure out a lot of that stuff on my own. And I still ended up trans, so what's the deal here? I demand a refund on my own childhood. My point is, God, what is my point even? I need to spend more time on the scripts. My point is that I had maybe one of the more traditional upbringings that you could ask for, and I still ended up trans. But because I didn't have the language to describe the feelings that I had, or the tools to actually manage those feelings in a constructive way, I had to be miserable for quite a long time. As a teenager, I tried so many ways to cope with these emotions that I was feeling, to find ways to affirm my masculinity or to explain the emotions that I was having. I turned to the military, trying to join the military because that's a very masculine thing to do, right? I turned to music, and I even turned to Christianity for a short period of time. And that actually went so weird that for a small sliver of time, I actually thought that I was being possessed by a malevolent demon that was making me think the weird thoughts that I was having, and that I inherently was evil because of those feelings. But girl, you weren't evil. You were just trans. And like, my parents are even atheists. They didn't push that on me. I had to seek that shit out myself. But I don't know. My parents are shit-lib hippies anyway, so I guess they are to blame for my sexual deviancy. They don't watch my videos, it's fine. I know my mom's co-workers do though, so no one tell her. The only reason why people even pretend to care about this now is because they've been told to care about it by big shot celebrities in the conservative mind space, most of whom are coming from the UK and the US. And because those places are the cultural hegemon of the entire fucking Western world, when Americans do something stupid, 2 years later, Swedes do the exact stupid thing anyway. And they do it because they've seen this as a pretty good venue to get people on their side. It starts off pretty easily, like you talk about trans women in sport, which I've talked about before, so I'm not going to mention it here. But that is an issue that works really well at convincing people that maybe these transes are up to something weird. And then you go after kids. Because kids have always been the prime target for conservative people who want to create culture wars. Everyone supports kids and no one wants to seem like they're against protecting children, so it fucking works. It becomes the first few steps to go into an extreme right-wing rabbit hole, because you start out with having some valid concerns, and then eventually you try to promote traditional values. Some people go so far as to want to fire teachers who happen to be trans. An agency in Texas is trying to enforce gender congruent clothing, which, I mean, I don't even know how that works. Fashion is not biological, Shauna. I thought we established this in the fucking 1920s. And we've been through this before, because it's what happened with abortion. Before 1977, Republicans were actually more in favor of abortion than Democrats were. But once conservatives made it into a culture war issue, it worked well as a tool for recruitment. You could claim that the opposition wanted to kill babies and that you wanted to protect babies, even though no one really cared about abortion at all just a few years prior. The control that these people want to try to enforce is the strictest possible gender binary, which includes gender roles. Many of the most proponent transphobes in this space are very open about the fact that they believe in gender roles, and that they believe that men should do certain things and that women should do other things. A system that heavily regresses many of the progresses that feminism has done over the last 200 years. Which is the same reason why conservative forces, while at the same time arguing against trans people and trans rights and gender-affirming care, are also trying to ban sexual education and the right to abortion. Because it's the same fight. What anti-trans activists are trying to do is undermine the concept of bodily autonomy, that you shouldn't have right to your own body. In children, this is a lot easier to argue because children already don't have bodily autonomy in some instances, but in adults, that's more difficult. But it's not stopping them there either. But the name of the game here is control. It's always been control. They want parents to control their children in a very typical way, and if they don't, the state is going to do that for them instead. And the goal of this control is to create a society where basically everyone is the same, or at least is predictably the same. A society where men are men and girls are girls, and any deviation of that does not exist. We'll get to why this is the world that they want in a tiny bit, but I quickly want to talk about how they're trying to get there. And that is by a complete miscarriage of the usage of the word truth. A lot of anti-trans commentators will talk a lot about truth and objective reality and scientific things, and they will argue that truth is basically the closest thing we have to some sort of moral indicator. We have to live according to real truth, because if we don't live in truth, we live in lies, which is bad.
I'm not going to go along with the general societal willingness to rewrite basic facets of human nature and human biology, and frankly, mammalian biology, in order to suggest that a delusion is true. Although that is obviously scientifically true. Trans women are not biological women are biological women.
It's a very simple version of philosophical morality.
But where are you going with this?
They will argue that we need truth in order to live a true and correct and happy life, an orderly life, in a society that makes sense. Because how can you structure society if you believe things that aren't even true? And I kind of get where they're coming from on this issue. I have had my edgy atheist phase. I get exactly what it's like for people to do something that you think is completely illogical and makes no scientific sense. I get that, and it's a concept that appeals to a lot of people who...
Looper! Lovely to see you. Thank you for bringing the wolf pack over. Thank you so much. I hope you're well, lovely. For anyone here who doesn't know the very delightful Looper Wolf, very fun and cool.
Your first brave goddess, you got this.
Streamer.
Now I'm a little chicken. Cheep cheep. See, that's so dark and scary. I'm like, I have no idea where these symbols are. Shit! Oh my god. Yep.
I'm doing actually okay, thanks, Looper. I've had a much better last month than I have the previous 12 months. And welcome in, Sunnif. Great to see you too as well, mate. Feel free to say hello, follow, etc., folks. If anyone needs to duck off and do post-stream care, I can always turn it up a little. How's that? Yeah. So, oh, I did an SP, and if like you were a stored procedure to be executed, but no, you're SO.
He's supposed to be right here, isn't he? Oops. He's not in here, is he? Hello? Lochluger, who the fuck are you? I don't remember you at all. Oh, I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay.
Yeah, that's totally cool, Looper. I appreciate you bringing some people over, and hope you have a great rest and a great weekend. Thank you for everyone who came in. Folks, if you feel like a follow, take a follow. And thank you for the Trans Awareness Week wishes. That's very appreciated. On Wednesday is going to be the big stream for this. Is Trans Day of Remembrance, where we'll be doing a vigil for the people who are trans and who have died in the last 12 months. Many of which will be as a result of violence or suicide as a result of violence, etc. So that's a big part of what Trans Awareness Week is about. It's about the sorts of, well, let's put it bluntly, shit fuckery. I mean, Trans Awareness Week is sure, like in the same way as Happy NAIDOC, right? So as I was saying earlier, Looper is Indigenous Australian streamer who is very talented, great artist, does all sorts of fun things on stream. I still want to see the Fluffy Bunny record make it to 20, but yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for asking. Yeah, you shouldn't say sad. I'm sorry for Trans Awareness Week. Yeah, no. It's supposed to be a broadly positive thing to actually understand that we exist and we're just normal people, and we want, we're not quite as normal as everyone else in some ways, but we're just as normal in every other. So, except for me. I am a weirdo. And son, great to hear that your boyfriend's off helping with some trans awareness stuff. That's cool. Yeah, we're all weird in our own ways, I know. But if you stack up all of the intersections of weirdness that I have, it's quite a sandwich to chew on, if you know what I mean. I get that. I'm not ashamed of it. I embrace the weird. So we're watching a... Oh, yeah, nice. Cool. Hey, look, activism is good. I'm all in favor of Alphabet Mafia getting shit done.